latest escalation of Israel's war on Iran. Israel also assassinated another top Iranian official, Iran's new wartime chief of staff, Ali Shadmani. The bombing of Iranian state TV occurred during a live broadcast that was cut short as the studio began to fill with dust after the blast.
What you observed, what you heard, this dust in the air.
The news anchor left her seat at the Iranian state broadcaster as the room filled with smoke. 3 employees of Iranian state TV were reportedly killed. The Committee to Protect Journalists said it was appalled by the Israeli attack. The group's Middle East representative, Sarah Kuda, said, quote, Israel's killing with impunity of almost 200 journalists in Gaza has emboldened it to target media elsewhere in the region, unquote. Many residents of Tehran are attempting to leave the city as Israel attacks the city for a 5th day. On Monday, 3 Red Crescent workers were killed while responding to an Israeli airstrike in the capital. Israel claims its, quote, full aerial operational control over Tehran. On Monday, President Trump wrote online, everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran, exclamation point. Iran is also continuing to fire missiles at Israel. On Monday, a major Israeli oil refinery in Haifa was shut down after being hit by a missile. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is refusing to rule out assassinating Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. He was questioned by ABC's Jonathan Karl.
The president flatly rejected a plan, an opportunity that the Israelis had to take out the supreme leader. Do you understand his concern? My understanding is his concern is that this would escalate the conflict beyond where it is already.
No, it's not going to escalate the conflict. It's going to end the conflict.
On Monday, leaders of the G7, including President Trump, signed a statement calling for a, quote, de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East, unquote, while also affirming Israel's right to defend itself, even though Israel launched the initial unprovoked attack on Iran. Trump left the G7 summit in Canada a day early. On his flight back to Washington, D.C., he told reporters he's seeking a, quote, real end to conflict, not a ceasefire. Trump said, quote, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple, unquote. Trump also criticized French President Emmanuel Macron, who had said Trump left the G7 to negotiate a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Reuters reports the U.S. military has moved a large number of Air Force refueling aircraft to Europe. The U.S. aircraft carrier Nimitz is also heading to the Middle East. On Monday, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine introduced a war powers resolution to require Trump seek authorization from Congress before attacking Iran. Al Jazeera reports Israeli attacks have killed at least 74 people in Gaza since dawn, including 56 Palestinians seeking humanitarian aid in Khan Yunis. Many were killed by Israeli tank fire. On Monday, another 38 aid seekers were killed, fueling growing international condemnation of the shadowy U.S.-Israel-backed aid operation. Anna Halford of Doctors Without Borders described it as, quote, neither a humanitarian enterprise nor a system. This is basically lethal chaos, she said. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has accused Israel of, quote, inflicting horrifying, unconscionable suffering on Palestinians, unquote. Meanwhile, French-Palestinian European Parliament member Rima Hassan criticized her fellow lawmakers for remaining silent after she and 11 others were detained by Israel while attempting to deliver aid to Gaza as part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla.
As long as this parliament is silent, Europe will no longer be a voice for human rights, but the echo of its own complicity and political cowardice. June 8th, I was kidnapped at sea internationally by the Israeli army while I was on board a humanitarian ship on the way to Gaza. There were 12 of us on board the ship, including 10 European citizens. All have been kidnapped, deported by Israel, and illegally detained for several days. In a deafening silence of this parliament, no condemnation, no call for unconditional release. I was handcuffed, searched naked, handcuffed hands and feet. I was put in solitary confinement for having written Free Palestine in my cell.
In news from Ukraine, a massive Russian missile and drone assault on Kyiv has killed at least 14 people and wounded over 50 more. Local officials say it was one of the largest attacks on the Ukrainian capital since Russia invaded in 2022. Authorities report 30 apartments were destroyed in a single residential block. One U.S. citizen died from shrapnel wounds. In a separate strike, a Russian attack on the port city of Odessa injured 13 more people. The assault came as the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky headed to the G7 talks in Canada. In Minnesota, federal and state officials have announced murder and stalking charges against Vance Belter, the man accused of assassinating Democratic State House leader Melissa Hortman and her husband and their home, as well as shooting State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette. Joseph Thompson is acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota.
Political assassinations are rare. They strike at the very core of our democracy. But the details of Belter's crime are even worse. They are truly chilling. It is no exaggeration to say that his crimes are the stuff of nightmares. Belter stalked his victims like prey. He went to their homes, held them out as a police officer, and shot them in cold blood.
Authorities say Belter visited the homes of 2 other lawmakers on the night of the killings. They also discovered a hit list that included Planned Parenthood centers and the names of many Democratic politicians, including Minnesota Senators Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and State Attorney General Keith Ellison, who will join us later on the program. On Monday, Senator Smith confronted Republican Senator Mike Lee after he blamed the political left for the shooting. In one post, the Utah senator wrote, quote, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way," unquote. The Department of Homeland Security has instructed immigration agents to continue raiding farms, hotels, and restaurants, reversing a call by President Trump just days ago to exempt those industries. The Washington Post reports Trump advisor Stephen Miller opposed making any exceptions for specific industries, despite warnings from business leaders about the economic fallout of the raids. Meanwhile, federal agents are continuing to carry out raids in and around Los Angeles. On Saturday, dozens of armed, masked agents raided a popular flea market outside Los Angeles. In Georgia, a prominent Spanish-language journalist is facing possible deportation after being arrested while covering Saturday's No Kings protests. Mario Guevara, who was live streaming the demonstration, was taken into custody despite clearly identifying as a journalist. Originally from El Salvador, he's built a large following for his reporting on anti-ICE protests. According to The Guardian, a municipal judge released him on bond Monday, but jail officials then said he would be transferred to ICE custody. A New York Supreme Court judge has blocked New York City Mayor Eric Adams from going ahead with his plan to allow ICE to reopen an office at the Rikers Island jail complex. Judge Mary Rosado sided with the New York City Council in its argument that Adams likely gave ICE the green light for the Rikers Island office in exchange for Trump's Justice Department dropping its corruption case against the mayor. In Mexico, 9 newly elected Supreme Court justices received their certificates of victory following Mexico's first-ever judicial elections in May. The incoming head of the Supreme Court is Hugo Aguilar Ortiz, a Mixtec indigenous lawyer from Oaxaca, who becomes the first indigenous person to hold Mexico's highest judicial office. Ortiz spoke during the election certification ceremony.
The days when our words, our requests, and even our mere presence were met with ridicule and discrimination in these very institutions are now behind us. Thank you for everything. The history of Mexico cannot be understood without considering the participation of indigenous and Afro-Mexican peoples at various moments of transformation. The electoral process we are now completing was no exception. I'm confident that this is the beginning of the full inclusion of indigenous and Afro-Mexican peoples in the public life of our country.
Mexico's judicial election turned out just 13% of eligible voters. It came following hotly contested reforms last year. Judges aligned with the ruling Morena party dominated the election, including the makeup of the Mexico Supreme Court. The Guardian's reporting health workers at the Department of Veterans Affairs could refuse treatment to patients who are Democrats, unmarried, or based on their national origin due to the VA's revised bylaws. Those were changed to conform with President Trump's anti-trans executive order, according to the report. And the new guidelines also apply to hiring practices, effectively allowing for employment discrimination. The White House has denied the report. The VA is the country's largest integrated hospital system with over 26,000 doctors serving 9 million patients each year. All 50 states, Washington, D.C., and 4 U.S. territories have signed on to a $7.4 billion settlement with Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin. The deal has reportedly also been approved by the Sackler family, owners of Purdue. If finalized, the settlement will go towards resolving thousands of victim lawsuits against Purdue. It'll also help fund addiction treatment, prevention, and recovery programs. Under the deal, the Sacklers will lose control over Purdue. The deal also does not shield the Sacklers from future opioid settlements, which they had previously fought for. Over 850,000 people have died from opioid-related overdoses in the United States since 1999. And the NAACP has announced it will not invite President Trump to its upcoming national convention in Charlotte, North Carolina. This marks the first time the organization's opted to exclude a sitting president in its 116-year history. NAACP President Derek Johnson said, quote, "Our mission is to advance civil rights, and the current president has made clear that his mission is to eliminate civil rights," he said. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, with Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.